this national emergency here in Tobago. What we do have here, members of the national community following us on the various platforms, is a room full of public officials from the central government and the Tobago House of Assembly and the technical people who are required to be involved in the event of an oil spill in our nation. And we are working in the context of a 2013 oil spill contingency plan. I have come here today, which is the third day. This thing started on Wednesday, right? So it's Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So it's the fourth day of this experience. From my recollection, I think this is the second time that we've had a major oil spill emergency involving Tobago. Sometime we had two tankers colliding on the northern side of Tobago, and on this occasion we have a mysterious vessel coming into our coastline and making contact with a reef on the edge of the coastline on the way out. From what I've seen this morning, I was out with the Chief Secretary and his team, and I haven't been there with the team of ministers who were here before. This thing could easily have passed us by had it not been for that collision down there with the cliff. On the other hand, it could easily have been worse, because from what I've seen, from the charts that we looked at, had this collision taken place east of Scarborough, and the spill that is on land now entering Scarborough Bay, it would have been a real disaster for Tobago, because we would have had to close the port. And had it been a little further west, in the Crown Point area, much of that spill may easily have gone into the marine park, into Boca Reef and Nylon Pool. That too would have been a major disaster. They say we have to thank God for small mercies. Apparently, from what I've seen, where this fouling is taking place and where the vessel has come to shore is probably about, if we had to pick a place, it's probably about the best place it could have happened without causing worse damage. I would like at this time to ask the Chief Secretary to give us a summary of what has happened from the first time we became aware of the arrival of this mysterious vessel, how we have gone about it. I have three ministers here who may be able to answer questions that the press may have, pertinent questions. But first, let's hear what has happened, how we've handled it, where we at now, and after that, we'll have a few more interventions as to where we go from here, and I will come back. So I'll share the proceedings, but I'm asking Chief Secretary to give us a quick, brief summary.
Thank you, Honorable Prime Minister, and allow me to recognize Ministers Young and Sinanan, as well as Deputy Chief Secretary and other secretaries and assistant secretaries, Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister, and MP for Tobago East, Ayana Webster-Roy. The minority leader is here as well. I recognize you. And of course, we have Permanent Secretary Kent, Chief Administrator Toby Kwashi, other public servants, and several technical folks in the room and experts in the room, and members of the media. Good afternoon all. The Tobago House of Assembly, through the Emergency Operations Center at Fairfield Complex, received the first report at 7:20 a.m. on Wednesday morning. And I want you to pay attention to that. Wednesday morning at 7:20 a.m. precisely, we received the first report. The Coast Guard was notified sometime in and around the same time period based on the reports from the Coast Guard. By Wednesday afternoon, we did our first press briefing and we highlighted the situation to Tobagonians and cautioned about the areas affected. By Thursday, we elevated the threat to a tier 2 threat, meaning that we were moving it from a localized threat to a national threat that required a national response. Also on Thursday, in fact, on Thursday night, up until, between Thursday night into Friday morning, we left there after 1 on Friday morning, we successfully installed some booms at the Scarborough port, and that is what has allowed the inter-island ferry service to continue unabated, and even for the cruise ship to be there today to protect the port from the spill drifting into the harbor. Beyond that, we have separated our tasks into 8 major tasks. And I want you to pay attention to the 8 major tasks that we have been working on throughout the time period. The first task was boom installation to allow for containment. And containing is important. If we had not contained it, it means that it could have drifted further east and further west. But containment is what has allowed for us to keep the thing within a specific radius. In fact, within a 15-kilometer radius. It's important to note that the first spill was detected 6 kilometers off the coast of Studley Park. That's where the first spill was detected. And it drifted 15 kilometers west, and there's a 12-kilometer line of oil spill detected heading into the port of Scarborough. So we identified the spillage areas and did containment. And we are still supporting the containment efforts with secondary booms to ensure that we don't have further stretch of the spill. The second task that we have been on is that we are simultaneously looking to deploy booms in surrounding areas and areas that are likely to be affected. So now that we have contained, as we speak, we have crews out on the water looking to install booms at other areas to prevent sensitive areas from being destroyed. We're talking about protecting along the Kilgreen stretch, Canoe Bay stretch, and later today some additional protections should be placed for the Pititru Lagoon. The third task is beach cleanup, and that has been a challenge, admittedly so, because we did not have the equipment required on island in Tobago. You would observe today that you see specialized tankers there pumping the material out of the water and off of the beach. Prior to that, we were operating manually by hand and the use of backhoes and trucks to clean as much as we could. But that continues unabated. Let me pause to highlight that the Division of Health constructed special cells up at Studley Park at what we call the dump to contain the material and so that the toxic material will not permeate and interfere with any aqueducts or any other area. So the toxic material is being properly contained when we take them out of the beach. The fourth task is identifying the vessel. And let me tell you before you ask that we still have not been able to identify the vessel by name. There may be some identifying characteristics, and notwithstanding using ROVs, meaning remote operated vehicles, we have not been successful in identifying an IMO number. And so the next task is to use infrared to more or less identify structure of the vessel and to see what is contained therein. The fifth task that we have been on is wildlife rescue and rehabilitation. We have workers from both the Department of Natural Resources and the Environment, along with a company brought in by Heritage, and they are actively looking for impact on wildlife. The impact to date on wildlife, thankfully, has been minimal considering what has transpired. We have not found considerable numbers of animals affected as yet, but they are out there working both day and night, because in the night there are some animals that are more prevalent than in the day. The next task that we have been on, task 6, is about diver logistics. We have been diving the site every single day. It started with Alvin Douglas and a team. They got support from a team sent up by Maritime Division from the Ministry of Works. Coast Guard has conducted 2 dives as well, but dives are taking place every day, and it's important to understand that it is inordinately difficult for them to dive there. The vessel continues to bob up and down on the seafloor, on the reefs, and so at the base, you only have about a foot of clarity, of visibility. And so it is a dangerous dive, and so they can't get as close as we would like them to get. The seventh task is really the ground logistics. And as you can imagine, this is a mammoth task, moving everything from truck and backhoe and tankers and workers, volunteers. We have CPEP crew, URP crew, crew from health. We have volunteers. Heritage brought up 40 volunteers from Trinidad, and they are experienced at beach cleanup. And so what we have been doing is mixing our inexperienced volunteers with those who are much more experienced and the contractors, so that we have a nice on-the-job training as they go sort of program, and ensure that everyone remains safe. They have PPEs. We are setting up decontamination sites for them. We have medics on site, EMTs on site, should anyone fall ill, and we are measuring and monitoring all the risk involved. And of course, the last task that we work on every day is that of inter-island logistics. As you will appreciate, Tobago did not have most of what is required to treat with a spill like this on island. We couldn't just drive it into Scarborough or drive it down to Cano Bay. We have to work out arrangements of getting them to and from Tobago. And so that's one of the tasks that we are engaging. TEMA continues to lead and to coordinate all of the varying agencies. We have coordinating meetings twice daily. So far, I've been able to attend all of those meetings. Certainly, at some point, I will not be able to attend all of those meetings, but we have those briefings twice daily so that we can measure the deliverables, weight against the challenges, and find solutions. So that's where we are at this point in time.
Thank you, Chief Secretary. Could I ask, since the oil spill contingency plan, which is a written document, identifies the lines of authority and so on, how we get involved and how we proceed, and the protocols, I would like to ask the Minister Young at this time, to give a brief intervention as to how the ministry got involved and how the reactions went and where we are at the moment.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Chief Sec, all protocols observed. So the ministry was first informed in accordance with the protocols on Wednesday, during the course of the day on Wednesday, as to what was taking place in Tobago. Immediately, as per the national plan, it triggered, and the permanent secretary, who is the head of that tier of response, called together a meeting that had the THA, TEMA, IMA, EMA, other bodies that are involved in this, and the technical people at the ministry together. And at that meeting that was held, because TEMA is the response team on the ground, TEMA asserted that they would lead the charge here on the ground. We made it very clear that we would continue to provide all of the necessary technical assistance. We immediately triggered what we normally do, the personnel at Heritage and others who are the ones who respond to these types of incidents, and getting the resources on the ground, and told them to start to mobilize, etc. We stayed in touch with TEMA and the THA all throughout, and at the necessary stage we inserted, I think it was on Thursday night, if I remember correctly, a team that's being led by our Chief Technical Officer, Mr. Mark Rudder, as well as two of our other experts at the ministry who are trained in dealing with these things, to be part of the team here on the ground. And as and when necessary, we've been reaching out. We've had offers. Well, we'd like to thank Woodside, because they actually had one of the major service companies who deal with oil spills and the containment here on the ground, thankfully, in Tobago. And they were part of that initial meeting, gave the authorization for Kaizen to get their booms out into the water, etc. We've had offers as well from both BP, Shell, and others, and we're managing that. And for example, BP is getting for us a more detailed ROV, a bigger ROV to get into the water to assist. We've been helping with the divers and these types of things. So the Ministry of Energy has been actively involved. Minister Sinan and myself came across here on Friday. We met with the Chief Sec, Mr. Stewart, and others at the site to get a visual, and we are just making sure that the resources are here, and of course following the protocols as per the national plan and under the constant direction of the Prime Minister. We've been keeping him involved and informed of what is going on, which led to another visit here today.
Thank you, Minister Young. Minister Sinanan, who is responsible for transportation, which is a key part of this and what goes on in the maritime life, could you tell us what your department has been doing?
Sure, Prime Minister. Acknowledge all. As you're aware, the Ministry of Works and Transport, the Maritime Division, falls under the purview of the Ministry of Works and Transport, and I, as Minister, would have gotten the briefing from the Minister of Energy, and also have been in close contact with the Chief Secretary. Our Maritime Division would have gotten involved from day one. As the Chief Secretary said, we would have sent across divers and so, and we would have triggered the protocol where we try to identify the vessel. We have heard of the challenges in actually identifying the proper owners of the vessel and the type of vessel and what the vessel is actually carrying. That process is ongoing. Maritime Division continues to work very close with TIMA here in Tobago. We do have personnel on the ground. We're also ensuring that whatever is needed from Trinidad gets priority on the fast ferries and the cargo vessel. Because as said by the Chief Secretary, a lot of the equipment and so has to come from Trinidad. We are making sure that Tobago gets that priority to have whatever it needs on board the vessels. And I can tell you right now, some additional trucks are being loaded with equipment to come across by this afternoon. So we're here to support, and I do have people on the different committees reporting to me as and when required, and I am in touch with the Chief Secretary a couple times every day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Sinanan. I think this is a good time for me to summarize where we at with this incident in Tobago. And permit me, or excuse me, if I only speak about what we know, and we leave the speculation out of the conversation for the moment. Fact number one is that an unknown vessel has apparently drifted upside down into Tobago's littoral zone. That vessel, we don't know who it belongs to. We have no idea where it came from. And we also don't know all that it contains. What we do know, it appears to be broken, having made contact here, and is leaking some kind of hydrocarbon that is fouling the water and the coastline. That vessel could have come to us from any kind of operation, especially if the operation is illicit. Because of the conditions you would have heard from those who spoke so far, the conditions around the vessel in the water, even though it's close to shore, we have not yet been able to determine the physical nature of the vessel. So we're not sure if it's a freighter, a tanker, or a barge, because only the keel of the vessel is visible, and its identifying physical characteristics are in water that we can't penetrate for the moment. But we are doing all that is possible to answer these questions. From mobilizing the contingency plan, I would say that everything that needs to be done has been to this point done and is being done and will be done to ameliorate and minimize and eventually eliminate the threat that the vessel poses to us. We are testing, or we're waiting for the results of the test to determine what the content of the cargo is, and I presume that sometime in the not too distant future we'll determine what other cargo and quantum might be on board, because we haven't been able to determine whether it is bunker fuel, fuel for propulsion in the vessel, or raw crude. Those are answers we don't have at this point in time, but as the days pass and the additional work is done and the experts are on the various inputs, we should be able to answer most, if not all, of these questions as we go forward. What should be clear to you is that some not insignificant costs are being incurred just to respond to this incident that we didn't plan for and that we didn't expect. But it has happened, and we are required to be dealing with it. So we are in the containment phase now. This phase will remain as long as the vessel is there and is a threat with contents that could foul our environment. But then we'll want to move from that stage to the stage of emptying the vessel. Because the one thing we cannot do is to leave the vessel there with content that could just keep spewing into the water. Because if we do that, we then would be at the mercy of the tide and the weather. Because fortunately, the weather is good right now. So the booms are effective in holding the spill in the zone that it's in. But if the weather changes significantly, especially on high tides and even on falling tides, the behavior of what is spilled from the vessel could change. Not to mention that even with the booms, the longshore drift will keep attempting to pull that thing around the coastline. And the last thing we want is for any of it to escape where it is there now. We can say thank God for small mercies, because where it is there now allows us to contain it better than anywhere else in our occupied zone. It's not a very heavily occupied part of Tobago. It also allows the booms to be put in such a way that it can trap the undesirable, but that is not a permanent situation. That could change. So we will have to move relatively quickly to determining what we do next, which is to bring the vessel to a position where it does not pose a threat. At the national level, we may require help, because once we start talking about salvaging, which is to get the vessel into a situation where we can control what goes on, we may have to have outside help. I can tell you that Trinidad and Tobago as a country, we have been offered significant help from friendly nations who are involved in this, and in the very near future. In fact, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of National Security are currently engaged in talking to people with more capacity in Trinidad and Tobago. But in the meantime, we'll be making full use of our capacity in-house with the companies that work here and for whom this incidental is something that they would be planning for on an ongoing basis. So we are doing what is required to be done. We can't undo what has been done. We can't pretend the vessel didn't come here. We can't pretend that we don't have a couple of kilometers of foul coastline. What we have to do now is to do what is required to bring some control to the situation. Cleaning the beaches is good, but if stuff is being poured out on a continuous basis, that then is just spilling tepid mud. Cleaning and restoration can only seriously begin after we brought the situation under control. Right now, the situation is not under control, but it appears to be under sufficient control that we think that we can manage. If it doesn't worsen, it should get better, because as the bigger booms come in, we'll be more confident in controlling it. And as we suction away what is leaking, then we are in a much better position than we were within the second or third day of the event. So I'm anticipating an improved condition, but because the vessel is literally precipitously located, it can change its location based on the tide. And remember, the tide lifting and banging that vessel against the rock, it can break, new holes can open, and then the vessel could slip into deeper water, and the situation can change. So let us not behave as though, well, we got it fully under control. But the point I'm trying to make is what reasonably can be done now is being done by the full involvement of all the state's agencies, central government, THA, and our various technical agencies. So that is where we are. And if you have any questions, you can place them now, and if the questions require an answer from our technical people or the politicians who are here in Tobago or in central government, I will ask them to intervene as the questions require. So let's have a few questions and proceed.
Good afternoon, Dr. Rowley.
Please identify yourself, your media house, and put your question.
Okay. Good afternoon, Dr. Rowley, and also the Chief Secretary, Elizabeth Williams, TV6 News. In terms of security purposes, Dr. Rowley, could not this vessel be detected before? I don't know if you looked at, in terms of the detection of the vessel before the spillage.
Well, again, that is speculation. We don't know what location the vessel was at. It is possible that the vessel came to us with or without a profile. Because if it was drifting in shallow water, at the top of the water column, it may not have been observed. On the other hand, it looks like it's high up in the air now because it has been lifted by the high tide and put on land. But if it was out in the water, it may not have been as exposed as that. So we have had no record of it, and that's as much as we know now. We are checking the Coast Guard radar equipment into the days ahead prior to see whether in fact it was missed. Clearly, if there were operatives in and around who had a distress, one would have expected that they would have communicated with the relevant authorities. We have no information of any such distress, assuming that the vessel was operating in our zone. On the other hand, if the vessel had come to us after a long journey across a long maritime path, we wouldn't have known. So we can't speculate now as to why we didn't see it, except to say that it drifted to us, and it might have been drifting low down in the water and came pushed up on the reef on land. So we're looking to see whether we missed something. Can't answer that now. But it is quite likely that there wasn't anything to miss. And that's what the Coast Guard is looking at right now.
In terms of, I know you said, well, we know that in terms of the oil spill, millions of dollars will be spent in terms of recovery efforts, etc. I know I asked the Chief Secretary also on several occasions about the quantum. Do you have, like, in terms of Tobago's, the millions at this point?
Maybe I should answer that, right? Whatever is required to do what needs to be done would not have been budgeted for the THA. This is a national emergency, and therefore it will have to be funded as an extraordinary expense. You know, it's like you budgeting for the month or the year, and then you get sick. You got to find the money and prioritize. So this is a priority because we have to respond, and we don't know the full scope and scale of what is going to be required, and therefore to try to say how much it's going to cost would simply be an educated estimate.
Were you surprised at all, Mr. Prime Minister, during the tour today, the areas that you visited? Were you surprised by the devastation you saw?
Not really. I've seen spills before. I mean, I've seen oil spills before, and we had them in rivers in Trinidad on a fairly regular basis, too often as far as I know. We had one that went off, you know. So we've seen oil spills before, and that's what oil spills are very messy and, you know, very stressful and expensive. And I myself, I've worked in a number of emergencies, including not oil spills, but volcanoes. And it's basically the same kind of approach, where you have a crisis, and you have to literally have a protocol and confine yourself to what your competence is in trying to understand it and responding to it. So that's where we are at the moment. So for me, it's not a surprise. I mean, it's a surprising that a strange vessel drifted into us, but we had the one with the people in Delgado that came all the way from Mauritania. That vessel came across the Atlantic from Mauritania to Tobago. If it had missed us, we never would have known. And this vessel almost missed us because it could easily have been, you know, taken with the tide around the south coast and gone into the mainstream of the current and on the way to Mexico. We would never have known. But having crashed into the beach down there is a different story.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. Candice Jackson from Tobago Updates Television News. Just a quick follow-up, first of all, from Liz's question regarding the costs. So is it that the government would fund the costs? Where would the funding come from?
The central government will have to provide the THA with whatever support the THA needs and also whatever we spend from central government, because as you would hope, the Ministry of Energy is involved, Heritage is involved, Ministry of Works is involved. They have their budgets that they'll spend from, and the THA is involved here in doing certain things, and we may have to hire other people to do other things. So these are extraordinary expenses not budgeted for, but the budgeting process in the Ministry of Finance will take care of that.
All right, and in terms of the Coast Guard situation, because we have not had a vessel here in Tobago for a while, stationed specifically in Tobago. The vessels that we had to undergo some repairs and so on. And there's a concern that had there been a vessel around, had the Coast Guard officers doing their regular patrols and so on, that perhaps this vessel could have been detected earlier before it came into shore. What's going on with our Coast Guard, and why do we continue to be without a stationed vessel here in Tobago?
We could have if we did see it. On the other hand, we could have missed it if we didn't see it. So that's just speculation. But we really do need to improve our fleet. As a matter of fact, we have just taken steps and work is underway to do major vessel refurbishment and return. The Cabinet has just approved a significant outlay where we've hired Damen to come and do a major on all our vessels that are down. So that program, I think we have 12 vessels in the pipeline, and the first one should be returned in a matter of a couple of months or so. And that's underway, and as soon as those vessels are delivered, we expect to return to a situation where a vessel will be stationed in Tobago. And it may very well be if one was here, it might have been in port, and the ghost ship might have passed without being known, or it might have been out there and probably run into it. You never know. So that's speculation. But we're doing even better than that. We are a few months ago, 2 months ago, I think it was, we did have a tour to Tobago to choose a Coast Guard, a site for the Coast Guard, and it is the intention of the Cabinet to have a new Coast Guard facility in Tobago, not just in Scarborough, and we're looking at the possibility up in Charlottesville or somewhere. And we are discussing that now, and sometime in the not too distant future, there should be a project of building another facility which should allow greater patrolling of the eastern and southern part of Tobago. So we are trying to improve our situation there.
And in terms of some of the response mechanisms, because I've been on the ground, even on the water, with some of the people that are out there doing the work, and the major complaint is that the action is too slow. The waiting times for everything to come up from Trinidad is too slow, especially since we are an energy-based country. Everything is just literally right there in Trinidad in terms of a lot of the equipment and things like that to respond to this, because this is day 5 technically of this, and a lot of people that are working on the ground are a little bit stressed out. They're disheartened because they don't think that the authorities are moving fast enough.
Well, I don't share that view. You can always do better regardless of what you have done. But the equipment and the personnel that we need are not all over the country. They are located in different parts of the country. And the people who have them in hand, like the oil companies, our contingency plan rely on the state using the standing equipment of the major oil companies who are with us. So their equipment and personnel would have to be mobilized. And that period of mobilization usually it could be a matter of hours, it could be a matter of days, depending on what you're mobilizing. But more importantly, you have to determine what the situation calls for. Because on the first day when we heard of a vessel in Tobago, it didn't immediately come with an assessment that the vessel is in fact spewing oil. It could have been an empty vessel that drifted there and is on the rocks, and nobody would have been to put out. But then by the time you assess the situation and realize that this is a threat, and it is in fact spewing oil that could foul our environment, then that kicks up something, and that's why the Chief Secretary spoke about Tier 1. Something is happening. What is that something? By the time we assess it properly, we now talk about Tier 2, meaning that, hey, we got to do other things, and that's where the mobilization kicks in. And of course, thankfully, we are not now talking about Tier 3, because Tier 3 means that the nation of Trinidad and Tobago is not able to cope with it, and the international community has to come in. So we're not at Tier 3, we are at Tier 2, and I think before I came to you here, we had a discussion upstairs with all our technical people. Chief Secretary was there, the Tobago officials are there. The general feeling is that we are in fact doing what needs to be done at this time, and we have in fact, once we kicked into Tier 2, Tier 2 is working, and we are putting more resources in. And of course, it is easy to say it's not happening fast enough, but we have to move it from point A to point B. And moving something from Galeota to Tobago is not just like that. It involves loading trucks, getting on the ferry, and in some cases require authorizations, right? Because the oil companies coming in, they would have to be authorized sometimes from another location. But I think that as far as my report from Minister Young was, functions in the office of the Prime Minister. So from day one, I was aware of what's happening. And every person who was called upon to play a role kicked in, and that's what is happening. I don't know of any resistance anywhere or any slackness. Chief Secretary, I don't know if you have a different point of view.
No, we have had significant cooperation from several agencies. So we have the IMA, they are doing the testing for us. We have the EMA, they are also part of the briefing and monitoring the cleanup efforts. We have the Pilots Association. So if you notice, we have been using the pilot boats. The All Tobago Fisher Folk Association, they are out there on the water as well with the team. I will say that Coast Guard has exceeded my expectations, given that in the past I have had challenges with Coast Guard and the operation. They have exceeded my expectations greatly. In fact, in some instances, they're doing 2 sailings per day from Trinidad, moving personnel and equipment to Tobago. And so I think, and we have Ministry of Energy, we have Heritage here. Heritage comes along with all of their list of contractors. Ministry of Energy comes along with all of their list of contractors, including their international partners. We have Maritime Division here as well. And I think TEMA, led by Director Stewart, is doing an excellent job of coordinating all of this. And then we have the divers. Yes, we have the divers. Not just the specialist divers coming from Trinidad, but we have Alvin Douglas and a group of local divers that dutifully go every day. In fact, the next conversation we're having is about they going to the area of the first sighting of oil to see if there is a debris field in that area that can give us some more clues in terms of the identity of the vessel as well.
One of the things that we need to mention is that what the divers have been able to tell us so far, which is of interest, is that they have observed that the vessel is streaming a length of cable, indicating that the vessel might have been towed at some time and that the cable may have broken. And if that is so, it brings into question what operation the vessel might have been involved in. So bits and pieces of information like that cause us to try to put a picture of what we're dealing with. So, but when things are happening, one can always say, especially with hindsight, that this could be better, that could be faster, and so on. But I think the response has been quite good. It has been within the context of the contingency plan. We've drafted that plan specifically taking into account that this kind of operation is what would be required in the event of an emergency, whether it is here in Tobago, in the forest in Rio Claro, on the coastline in Galeota, in Charlottesville, or in Chagaramas. So it's that kind of operation. And as long as we cooperate as we have been cooperating, I'm very pleased that we have in place a good infrastructure of technical people and technical agencies who know what they are required to do. The fisheries department is here. If our fisheries are affected, they will have an interest. The health department is here. If people are affected, they'll have an interest. I think we're all pulling together. So let's not beat up on ourselves, when in fact things are going reasonably well. I think it's going quite well. I'm quite pleased with what I've seen from the management standpoint. I'm disturbed about the spoilage and the fouling on the beach. But as I say, that's not something that we can wish away. We'll just have to deal with it.
Now, in terms of the oil booms themselves, my last conversation actually just about an hour or two ago with some of the people that are placing the oil booms out there, they're saying that they need to perhaps put some more because the oil is actually moving over the oil booms. And I think you mentioned there's some larger ones coming. How soon can we expect the larger ones to come in?
I sort of hinted at that when I spoke, that we have installed, the booms we have on hand are 24-inch booms. And we have installed those. So the containment is holding. And what they sought to do today is to start doing some secondary booming because the 24 inch is not large enough. The larger ones in particular, we are getting some 42 inches and some 50 inches that will be arriving later today on island, along with additional vessels. The Pilot Association, I think they should have about 2 additional vessels coming to assist. And one of the companies bringing the larger booms are bringing specialist vessels that can allow for the deployment of those large booms from the vessel. Those larger booms essentially are installed in water and has to be inflated in water. Some of them have to be inflated in water. So it's a bit more difficult to install than the ones that we have just installed. But we continue to use what we have, keep as much of the spill at bay as possible. We also have skimmers on island that allows us to take and extract the oil from the water once seaweed is not there. And of course, you have seen the vacuum tankers that is suctioning out the mixture of seaweed and the oily substance that's there as well.
The one good thing that we have to be grateful for, notwithstanding thoughts that this could have happened and that could happen, once the weather stays cooperative, we can keep improving on the objective of confining the effluent. If the weather changes, all the boom story goes out the window, right? And the size of the boom, if the weather changes, if a storm passes through, we are now in the dry season, but we can get a change of weather from time to time. That would bring a different story. And it doesn't mean that we wouldn't have done what we were required to do. It would mean that the circumstances would have changed. So far, we're keeping our fingers crossed that we're doing the best that we can that should be done in good weather and trying to bring control of the situation. If the vessel breaks any further and leaks more oil out, it will change the picture. But so far, I was there at low tide. It was sitting on the reef at low tide. High tide may lift the vessel and it may change its position. It doesn't have to change by a mile, it could change by 10 feet and a new hole could open. So these are all possibilities that we have to think about in the event that they happen. So we are bringing in more and more resources, and I want to make this point because I'm sure it's going to come up. The fact that these resources are not in Tobago is not unusual. Tobago is part of Trinidad and Tobago. The resources are in Trinidad and Tobago, and we'll use all of it, whether the incident is in Tobago or in Chagaramas. And if Trinidad and Tobago doesn't have within our borders what is required, then we have to look externally. And that, again, that's when you can have more delays and more logistical issues. But these kinds of situations, thankfully, don't happen too often, and it's happening where so close to land. Because if it was happening, if this kind of spillage was happening by a well that was distressed, it would have been a different horse, and it would have been a horse of a different color. And all the logistical toing and froing would have been plating. And we have a number of wells out there in the ocean. We're drilling very deep wells in the deep water. We're taking every possible precaution to ensure that we don't have a spill like this in our deep water or in our shallow water or elsewhere. But when it does happen, we simply have to respond to it through this contingency plan that we are evoking here now.
Good afternoon, Elizabeth Gonzalez, Guardian Media.
Yes.
I want to know if we have set a deadline as to when we hope to get the vessel out of the water.
No, we have not, because we have not been able to properly assess the situation in the water. You would have heard the divers can't even see what is going on just yet. And when we get better ROVs in, and hopefully we should be able, and then the steps have been taken to have infrared look to see what's in the vessel. So until you make those assessments in the coming days, we can't really answer that question. And the one thing I wouldn't like us to do is to be speculating about what we don't know. We keep trying to find out using the technology that's available to us.
Good afternoon to Dr. Rowley and to the Chief Secretary, Corey Connolly, Newsday.
Corey.
Dr. Rowley, given what you've seen so far as Prime Minister and as a Tobagonian, are you concerned for the future of Tobago, given its tourism base? And also bearing in mind that Tobago is still rebounding from COVID.
Of course I am. I mean, we are engaged in a way, we are engaged in the hydrocarbon business. But remember, this vessel is not didn't come to us. This crisis didn't come to us as a result of our business. It appears to have drifted into our territory from somewhere else. That's the information we have right now. I don't know if that will change. But I think this should let us take pause and appreciate how well we do, because all around southern Trinidad, eastern Trinidad, around Tobago, we handle liquid hydrocarbon, crude oil, and natural gas on a daily basis. Thousands of miles of pipeline, and we don't have this happening on a regular basis on this scale. So it should tell you how well we are doing. But our infrastructure is there and could fail from time to time and create this kind of situation or worse. And then we'll be called upon to respond. So thankfully, it is not a frequent occurrence. And from the operations that we are engaged in Trinidad and Tobago, this did not come. Right? So, and then of course, we would desperately want to keep Tobago clean, green, and serene. And Tobago's serenity, which is now disturbed because of this, Tobago being clean, our beaches and littoral zone and our waters need to be kept clean, because if we're offering it, the best part of Tobago's economy is its tourism. So it is important that we be cognizant that we don't expose the tourism product to this kind of thing. And because it has happened, we have to contain it. As I said earlier on, it will cost significant monies, and we have to try to restore it. Whatever has happened that is deleterious, we have to try to restore it. And sometimes nature plays a role. I went through the mangrove this morning. I'm pretty confident that the mangrove will, if no more oil goes in there, not too much disaster will occur in there. The mangrove will look after itself. The sludge will, there'll be some biodegradation taking place in there. But we got to keep out any more oil from going in there. So that the booming will have to take that into account. And we just have to try and minimize the impact, because the greater the impact will be, the greater the cost, and the longer it will take to recover.
Pleasant afternoon, Carisia Douglas, TTT Limited. I know the last press briefing the Chief Secretary had, he indicated that specialist divers were joining the local divers in trying to attempt to plug the leak. Any updates on this, please?
Yes, so the specialist divers were sent from the Maritime Division of the Ministry of Works. They looked at it, and the report is that we can't plug the leak. So essentially, you'll observe that we are looking for ways beyond containment with the boom to actually stop the outflow of oil. But the specialist divers were clear that it cannot be plugged in the way that we had hoped for, and that what has to happen is that we have to find a way to now extract every bit of oil that's in the vessel. Bearing in mind, as we have been reiterating, not knowing the the schematics of the vessel, we can't say for certain whether or not there aren't other compartments on the vessel that contains fuel or this oily substance, or God forbid, some more toxic substance. We just don't know. And that's why even the conversation about moving the vessel, the salvaging, all of that has to wait until we can figure out the schematics of the vessel one, and then that will give us an idea that we can make a much more educated guess as to what might be contained therein, and then we have appropriate actions to match that. So no, we can't plug the vessel as we had hoped for. In fact, those specialist divers might be returning to Trinidad today, but we are using the booms to do containment at the moment. We're trying to extract all of the outflows that we can, and of course, we will utilize other technologies to figure out what's in the vessel.
Let's just understand that the vessel is not an insignificant one. It's a fair-sized vessel. I was quite surprised, when I got the information on Wednesday, and into Thursday, we're talking about a smaller vessel. But as it's been fully exposed now, 90 meters. That's not an insignificant size. So if it has a lot of fuel in there, it will take quite some time for it to dribble out. And we just can't disengage from it until it has been emptied. So if after a while we come to the conclusion that no plugging can take place or whatever, we will definitely have to move to consider how do we remove that oil or whatever it has on board, because once it's there, the next storm would be the time when we have to be worried about, because we just can't leave it there. Right? If it is cleaned and emptied, it can be left in location, that's all right. But it cannot be left unattended if it contains more of that liquid.
And one of my final questions, Prime Minister, and probably Chief Secretary as well, in regards to the residents in Lambo who inundated with the stench of the oil or whatever it is, could you give any response to that in terms, because there are concerns about their health at this point in time and the impact of that constant stench on their respiratory systems and so on?
The residents in Lambo, I am very sorry that this unfortunate incident has happened in your backyard. There is little to nothing we can do about the stench, unfortunately. Of course, as I've been advising, and we have been having the air representative as part of the cleanup efforts, and in fact, the residents of Lambo themselves have come forward to volunteer, and we appreciate that very much. But if you know you have respiratory illnesses and so on, it will be in your best interest to either self-relocate or find ways to mitigate against that. You can utilize masks, and if you don't have, in fact, we can make some available. We have quite a bit that was brought to the island thanks to Heritage, the appropriate kind, so we can make some of those available if that will help. And while I'm on that, let me indicate, though, to Tobagonians generally, I know we have a penchant for sightseeing, and that's putting it nicely. When you go to Moray Heritage, there must be, as a staple, a village macro. Let me take the opportunity to caution all of us to be very careful of the sightseeing. We don't want any incidents and accidents by you simply wanting to sightsee. We have been extremely transparent to this point. In fact, we keep most of our press conferences from right on the location. We come out every day and we give you the facts as they evolve. When conditions change, we are open with you in saying what those conditions are. We are open enough to also say what our limitations are. So we beg of you, please, to be very careful. In fact, we have cordoned off the area leading to Cano Bay, and we have placed security there. We have had to block a part of the roadway entering into, well, moving from Lambo into the Hampden area, around the Petitrew area, and that's because the sea has been splashing the oil particles onto the roadway, and having fires washing it is almost useless at this point because the sea continues to bring it up onto the roadway. So until all of those particles are removed from the ocean, then the roadway will continue to get those particles, making the roadway a bit slippery. We have had to do some soft closure at Milford Road, and that will go until Ash Wednesday, and especially in the area between Smithfield Junction and the corner by the Coast Guard base there. And that is so that we can manage the curiosity of our people, so that you can remain safe. We will televise all the things that needs to be televised. Further, I want us to appreciate that the workers who are there, some of what they do is extremely risky. Extremely risky. And let me be frank with you. I don't know if I am comfortable seeing on TikTok divers who are putting their lives at risk, that being televised. What if peradventure something goes wrong? I don't know if the relatives of those divers who are doing extremely high risk tasks will want to know that an accident and eventuality sort of is televised, if you understand what I'm saying. I've also seen some misinformation in the space, unfortunately. So for example, I saw a TikTok with just 2 people in white suits in a whole beach full of the oily substance. And then when I inquire, I was told that the instruction was given that, look, we don't want you there. We don't want any manual labor there. But of course, people want to televise their own experience cleaning up and so on. So let me just add the caution. Let me end by saying that Tobago beaches generally are open for all. In fact, the cruise ship is here. People have gone to Pigeon Point today. People are still going to Castara. You can go to Charlottesville. You can go to Mount Irving. We have extremely nice beaches still available. Now is a good time to drive up to Speyside, the best part of the island, and take an island tour. And Mason Hall, you might get a river bath. But the point is, we actually put out a release indicating the areas that we are not going to allow bathing. Once that the area you desire to go to is not on that release, it is safe for you to bathe there, right? It is very safe. The IMA has been taking water samples throughout, so the testing is continuous. The AMA has also been monitoring. So it's very safe for you to bathe and for you to engage in water sports, even in your famous Storby and Pigeon Point. It is still very safe there.
Well, thank you very much. I think we've covered all of it. Let me just summarize by saying we will do everything that is required to be done within our resources, both local and any assistance which we accept from outside, to ensure, one, that the Port of Scarborough remains operational and safe for all its normal traffic, because that is number one priority now given the threat. And the second threat is we'll do everything that is feasible within the technology that's available to try and prevent what is escaping from this vessel from getting out of the area that is being cordoned off, and ensuring as far as we are able to that it doesn't get around Crown Point to threaten the West Coast and the Marine Park. So once those two things are done, well, we would have managed it in a way that the zone that is affected is really the crisis area, and we can try to control things in there. We are now not in full control, but all our various departments are working towards that to come into a point of control. That control will begin, we can begin to say we are in some element of control when we begin to be in a position to extract from the vessel what is there. Because if it turns out that the vessel is empty, then that is a minor control. If it turns out that it's having a few thousand barrels of whatever in there, we have to be in a controlled situation to be able to extract it. Other than that, I am pleased to say that I can leave here today thinking that what has to be done is being done, and I want to thank the Chief Secretary and his team and the ministries and their teams for doing what they have been trained to do and what they're expected to do under these circumstances. So thank you all very much, and we'll continue to be informed by the THA, by the Ministry of Energy and the Ministry of Works and Transport on this particular crisis. Thank you very much.
This is TTT. Live for local.